So I'll just wait a few more minutes so that we can get just a few more people, and then we will start. How are all of you guys doing? That's good. I'm doing fine. Oh, thanks, James. I had that literally engraved into my mind and then um kind of forgot about it. Hi guys. Oh, fake guy, I hope it gets better for you. Let me just do more check. Okay. I think we can begin. So let me go over here. My pretty tab. Okay, so this event is going to be talking about the ins and outs to programming. Like I said earlier, we're going to talk about how we can get you guys into the mindset of programming, as it isn't something easy to get into and it does take a lot of practice. However, after tons of writing and a lot more practice and going through the debugging and all that good jazz, you'll start to get a hang of programming, to which you'll be able to start creating awesome games. So let's begin. So before we begin, actually, if you have any questions, you'll see a little QA tab towards the top right. Yeah, top right. If you have any questions, you guys can submit them and I will get to them during the event as well as at the end of the event. If there are any questions that are similar to your question, please give it a like rather than repeating the question. It'll make it a lot simpler for us. James will be moderating the event, so if anything goes wrong or he needs to take action, he'll be taking care of it, as I do not see what goes on. I just present. So sit back, relax, and welcome to Programming 101 with Wooly Wool. So I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Wooly Wool. I am an event organizer presenting an event. I'm part of the community feedback program. I wrote for the dev blog, which is that developer base plate that you might have seen on DevRel. I talked about instance-based versus dictionaries and data-based programming, and talking about how data-based is a lot better rather than using instances. So if you want to read that, I can link you to that towards the end. And also, I will be a summer accelerator this summer, so that will be a really fun time. If you're interested, you can follow me on Twitter, and I usually post development tweets, sometimes meme tweets here and there, but mostly development tweets, and I'll be doing a lot more of those once the summer hits, as I'll be able to talk a little more about my team's game. So with being myself, I did start somewhere with programming. It wasn't easy, of course. It was pretty difficult. So when I first started, of course, I was part of the free model gang. Everyone using the free models. I started there, of course. I just mostly wanted to just learn the tools on Roblox Studio. It was a bit overwhelming because there was that huge catalog, of course. So it took some time. And then from there, I started to use what Roblox used to have, which was Roblox University, which they taught you how to make your own like little murder mystery game or how to make a racing game. So I started to learn programming a little more through Roblox University. I was still in middle school, so it was kind of hard to take a grasp of everything. So I really was just sitting there taking it in, and it didn't really stick. It just kind of went out the other ear. And then towards 2019, I started to write my own code. It was pretty overwhelming at first, mostly because like I'm doing it. I'm not following a tutorial or something. I'm mostly trying to do it all on my own. However, through a lot of dedication, I don't recommend you do what I did, but I kind of programmed for 12 hours straight. But I was doing it during the towards like the end of 2019 and during the pandemic. Of course, I was trying to learn it because there was nothing much I could do during that time. So I was like, why why not learn programming finally? Let's do this thing. So I started writing my own code. Of course, we all start somewhere. Some of you might learn it a lot quicker than others. For me, it took time just because, like, it's so new to me. I don't do this a lot. I don't, program while I sleep. So now I do, but back then I didn't. And from there, we're gonna talk about, like, with the programming, people view programming in different ways, of course. So, like, programmers, they view programming as something heavenly, something, that we all enjoy doing. While, others, not so much. Programming is kind of scary because, like, you're typing it. There isn't drag and drop like Scratch or some of the other programs. It's mostly you got to do it. And if you're stuck, you got to figure it out or you have to go get some help. But also some programmers are kind of like when they have to debug the code, just because sometimes it's hard to identify what is going on, how it's occurring. So it's just it's kind of hard to do that sometimes. So I'm gonna start with, like, a small example, of course, just so you guys can kind of see with programming what you can do with it. So let's start. We have a part, just a normal old 4x4 part. And, this part is just going to sit there. It's not going to do much. But with programming, of course, when you add a little bit of code to it, you can make it do something. So in this case, with this code, which you should do on the client, by the way, because if you do it on the server, it's kind of going to be a little like sketchy and it's going to look a little weird. So with programming, you can make it so that this part slides using the tween service. I'm going to just explain a little bit of this code because some of this is a bit new to some of you. So if you're new to this, don't worry, I'll make sure you understand it. So essentially what the tween service does, it allows you to change a property of an object or an instance, and it will do it in, like, an animation kind of style. So in this case, I want it so that the part is going to slide to the right. And I'm going to be using the C frame, which is a coordinate frame, which you take the current coordinates of the part and you're just going to move it over rather than having to use the positioning. It just makes it a lot easier. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to take the part while adding in these little properties with the tween info, such as I want it so that it's going to slide and it's going to grow a little bit and it's going to slow down once it gets towards the end. And then I'm going to have it slide to the right, 5 studs. So with this code, I'm able to make it so that it kind of slides over. As you can see, nothing much, it's just a part moving over, right? But going a little forward, let's say you have that same part, but you want to make it so that it starts floating. But you can't do it just with one instance. You're going to have to use another instance, which we will be using the vector force. The vector force is essentially giving the object a force associated. It's like with physics. So if you haven't taken physics, I'm going to give you a quick physics 101. In physics, there are different forces, and one of those forces is the weight, and the weight of the object is pointing downward. So it's gonna, if you unanchor this part, it's just gonna fall down. However, with the vector force, you can make it so that there's another force pointing upward, so that it's gonna be an equilibrium, which means the forces acting upon this object are gonna be 0. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to make it so that it's gonna take this weight of this object and it's going to have one vector pointing down while another pointing upward. And with that code, you're going to make it so that this object isn't going to move. It's just going to stay floating. As you can see right here, I can just move this part around and it's going to start floating. So as you can see, there isn't much to this part. You're taking care of its movement, which we did with moving it to the right, and now it can float. Really entertaining, but there's more to it, of course. I'm just trying to show you guys a little bit of abstraction. With this object, there's so much you can do with it, but you have to think how you're going to want to do it. It's all abstract. Like, you're going to see in games parts where the player can collect it, or parts that may disappear on the player and put them in a tight situation where they're going to have to act fast. So these parts, you're going to have to program it to do what you would want it to do. And as I said, it's all abstract. You have to think outside the box of how you're going to do it. But you can do so much with this part. You can edit its color. You can edit the transparency, the orientation. You can add connections to it, which is like the touched or um, mostly just the touched with the parts, but you can do with like the UI with buttons. You can add in the button click. You can also edit its position, which I brought up, as well as you can edit the physics that go along with it, which is with the floating part and the vectors. So there's so much you can do with one part, but you have to determine what you want to do. So I'm going to show you guys an example from everyone's favorite current game, the Sonic game, totally not sponsored. But what you can do with, let's just say, one of these little parts that you have to collect to help gain EXP. So with this part, as you can see, it's moving up and down. So if you think about it at first, all right, well, this part is going to probably be under a run service or some sort of tween where it's going to be moving up and down as well as rotating 360 degrees. So with that, associated with the part, there's going to be particles. As you can see, like right here, there are little particles that are sticking outward and making it look shiny and pretty, as well as you have to edit its orientation, which is its rotation on the XYZ plane. So in this case, it's just rotating 360 degrees, it seems like, on the y-axis. Next, you're going to have to take care of the connections. So if you notice in the Sonic game, when you're up close to the object, it's going to come towards you. That's a connection that's related to it. It's probably a run service connection where they're going to check to see if you're close by using the magnitude and if you're within that small magnitude. A magnitude is essentially you're going to take your current position and the object's current position, and it's going to tell you the distance between those two objects. And from there, you're going to determine whether or not it's close or not. And from there, if you are close enough, then it's going to come to you and it's going to give you that EXP. And it's editing its positioning. Okay. Nothing too major. It's mostly just there so that the player can collect it. However, with the fast speeds, it's kind of hard to do it with a touch connection just because like there are a few flaws that come with like using the touched, because if you're running so fast, it might not notice that you actually touched it. So they're trying to use some sort of run service to determine if you're in range. All right. Are y'all doing good? Hope I didn't scare you guys away so far. Good. Okay. Moving on. So, it's simple. It isn't overwhelming. You'll get through it. Trust me. I've been through it. A lot of us have been through it, so you'll get there. But there's always, on top of like this programming, there's always different ways that you can do the programming, but they all can do the same thing, but it's a matter of how you want to do it. For instance, if we look back at this object, I don't know what it's called in Sonic. I'm so sorry. I'm a fake fan. I don't play Sonic. But anyways, with this object, you could do tweening if you wanted to for having this shard move up and down. You can use run service and determine which direction it's going to go, and determine the threshold of which it's going to switch directions. Or you can, not recommended, but you can also use a tween service, not tween service, a touch connection to determine whether or not the player actually touched it, which they don't use. They use run service to determine its magnitude, like I brought up. So there's so much you can do with it, but it's a matter of how. So we're going to shift gears towards looking at the part, and we're going to more look into data. One of the things with data is you can make it so that, the player can have cash, and you want the player to have cash earned, or they can buy something. So we're going to look at a few different data structures, and I'm going to talk about each data structure. So usually when a programmer starts, they take the simple route, which is recommended. You don't want to start in the deep end, because if you start at the deep end, you're going to be so confused. I'll tell you that right now. When I first started programming, I went right into the deep end, and it was it wasn't fun. I was kind of confused here and there. So it it's not easy, but it's nice to start small and grow from there. So in this case, what this code is doing is it's creating this integer value. An integer value is just a number that doesn't have a decimal. It can be from negative infinity to positive infinity. Um, from there, they're determining uh, like this is going to be for the cache for the player, and they're going to attach it to the player object, as you can see right here to the right. So I have my player object, which is Woolly Wool, and then I have like the backpack, starter gear, player UI, player scripts. Then I have this cache integer value, which is going to be attached to the player. Another way you can go about doing this is something we like to call dictionaries. What I recommend to do with a dictionary is you should try to modularize it. In this case, I'm not using modules just so I can show you it, but modules essentially are global functions between the server or the client or both. Essentially, what you can do is you can set up a specific data type or what you need to do, and you can call it anywhere. So, like if you have a data structure and you need to edit a value from the server, you can call it in any other script and send the value that you need. So in this case, what we're doing is we're taking the player data dictionary and we're adding in this new index, which is the player. And we're going to be setting up like the player table so that we can add in different values. So in this case, we're adding in the cache, which we're setting it to 0. And as you can see to the right, we don't have that integer value. So you may be wondering, like, they're doing the same thing, but there is a difference between these two coding styles. And you may notice it right away, which is mostly about, the efficiency. So with the instance-based dictionary, there are pros and cons to it, of course, but the pros are it's easy to call the specific integer value. You just have to get the player object and then just call cache integer value and then set the value. And it's simple to edit this instance because like it's an integer, so you just do dot value and you set it to whatever value you want it to. However, there are cons that come with this. Anyone can see this value because this is being replicated to all players. Replicated means like it's being whatever you do on the server, it's going to be sent to all the other players. So they're going to see it, even though they can't see it unless they're going to be exploiting, which exploiting is bad, don't do it. But anyone can see this. And if you're like me, made a murder mystery game where you used string values to determine the player's role, an exploiter can see that and they can take the fun out of it. And on top of that, there may be a lot of data. So like there might not be just the cache data. There may be a ton more. So you'll have to add so many extra lines just to create these instances, parenting them, setting the values. And there are added steps for saving the data. For instance, what you'll have to do is, in order to save the data, they need a dictionary. So you'll have to loop through all of the data objects that you have associated with the player, and you're gonna have to set them into a table, and it's just take a bit longer to set up. And so it's not efficient and it's not ideal to use, though a lot of beginners do use it. I started off using it, but as I've grown, I've kind of moved away from it and started using dictionaries for data, as it is a lot more efficient and it's a lot more clean. So if someone wants to read it, they're going to understand it. I'm just going to take a look at the chat really quick. User 9684, you can use .user ID. It does not matter what you want. You can use anything, but I'm just using the name just so it's simpler. Essentially, what you'll be wanting to do, though, is when you do save the data, you need to save it on the user ID, not the name. So I'm just setting up the dictionary so that it's under their name, but when I actually do save the data, it's going to be under the user ID. Okay. And then with the dictionary-based data, there are many more pros than the cons. It's easy to read and manage, of course. Like this is a lot simpler to look at than that. And if there's a ton of these, it's going to get a little hectic. But with this, you just have to add one line of what you need. The data can't be read by all players. Not be ready. It can't be read by all players. So essentially what you'll have to do is you'll have to create a system where you want to share the data to the player in a way that they only see their own data rather than seeing everyone else's data. So you'll have to create a little system. That's one of the cons, but it's not that hard. Mostly you have to use like remote events just to send the data. There are, of course, less steps for saving the data. Literally all you have to do is just call this data and put it in for the set async for the data store. And then it saves on memory usage because you're not creating. So if you look back here, imagine if you had like 100 of these. And if there's 100 of them, then if there were, let's just say 10 players, there's going to be 1,000 instances just for data. That's going to like murder the memory for some players. So this is just going to reduce that because you're not creating instances. You're just sharing data between the player through remote events, which does not hurt anyone. So essentially, this is a lot more efficient. There is one more way you can go about this. To some of you, this is gonna be so new to you. I literally started this like a few weeks ago, but you can use meta tables. For this kind of situation, I wouldn't recommend using meta tables because you'll have to keep track of the instance. But essentially, what a meta table is let's just take an example. So if you were to go and create, let's go look back for a second. This will actually be a lot easier. So you see this instance.new. Instance.new is creating this new object. And this object has different properties and may have different connections that go along with it. Essentially, that's what the meta table and object-oriented programming is doing. You're creating your own classes to which you can set different functions, different properties, and edit those functions and properties as needed. So in this case, what I'm doing at the bottom right here is I'm creating this new data tree with the cache. And from there, I can make it so that I can add the cache value by incrementing it, or if I want to print data. So over here, I'm going to be creating this new object. And from there, I can increment it. And when I want to print it, it'll come out as the same way as it would right here. It's just a little bit easier. Let me look back at the chat if there's anything else. Yeah, there isn't a limit. You can put as many data tables as you want. You can use as many data stores as you want. I typically just use one, and they're large enough so that you don't need to create multiple. They've been growing the data storage by a lot, so you don't need to really create too many of them. Okay. I hope that makes sense. I tried to make sure it made sense because I didn't want to scare a lot of you because like object-oriented programming in itself is so new and it's foreign to a lot of people. For me, I didn't use it for a long time until recently. And after I got into it, I kind of started using it like a ton more because it's like, wow, I could have done this instead of all of this. My goodness. So I've been using it and I'll be using it a ton, especially during the accelerator because, it's a lot easier. So I hope I did my best trying to explain it. Is it better to use multiple? It's up to you, essentially. I just use one because it's easier to call and I don't have to, call different data stores if I want to edit different things. I just use one and it's my go ahead. So up to you. So let's move forward. We're going to now talk about everyone's favorite, debugging. Y'all like that, I hope. But debugging isn't that bad if you can identify the source. I'm going to just talk about like some of the steps with debugging because debugging in itself, it can be tedious at times. However, if you take these steps and identify what the issue is and how you're going to fix it, it's going to help you a ton with fixing the issues that you may be having. So here we go. So what my first step is always is try to identify the source. So usually what happens is sometimes the like the set of if statements that you may have may not be reached. So what I do, like everyone, is I create these print statements to see where it isn't being reached. And once I identify where it is, then I look to see, okay, well, what's wrong with this if statement? What is not true? Or sometimes if you're not using an if statement and like you may have this function, but it's yielding so much. Yielding essentially means it's pausing like it, so you have like different lines of code, let's just say. And from those different lines of code, you may have this function, but this function may, let's just say, have a wait statement in it. So anything below it, it's not going to run until the wait statement is over. So yielding essentially makes it so that anything below will not run until this certain line is done. So essentially, you may have like a yield or an infinite yield that may be occurring, which may make it so that you can't reach this specific line. So identifying where the source of the problem is going to help you and make it so that you can identify what you need to fix and how you need to fix it. As I brought up, the value may not be true. It may be different or unexpected than what you wanted. One time for me, when I was trying to pass in like this coin value, I made a typo with calling that specific coin value. And what happened was it was returning nil because that specific index doesn't exist. So I had to look for it and identified it, and I was like, oh, okay. And then after I made the change with the typo, then I was able to read it, and everything was good to go. And then from there, you'll have to edit the code as needed, test, and please make sure to test this multiple times. If you test it once and it works, it may work, but like if you test it multiple times, and it works all the time, then you'll be able to say, 100% this works. Because I've seen in other games, like, it may work once, but it might not work all the time. And it's happened for me a ton. So I recommend you always test it, make sure it works. And then after it works, then you can stop working on that part and move on. So I'm going to show you guys an example of what I had to debug once. So as you can see, this is a rag doll for like one of the death effects I worked on. What I wanted it to do originally was I wanted it so that when they die, it's anti-gravity. So there's gonna be like a force going upwards so that they can start floating. But there was an issue with one of the properties which wasn't being sent. It wasn't being set, I meant. So essentially because of that, it caused this to happen. So it was a bit weird at first. It was kind of funny too. But after I was able to identify it, kind of poked fun with it and made it into its own little death effect because I was like, this would be a funny one to add in. But essentially, this is what some of the debugging you may have to do. You'll have to identify which value isn't being set. For me, I just didn't set one of the properties correctly, so this is what caused that to happen, which made it a really funny thing. But sometimes what will also happen is you'll have errors that will occur in the console. Um, you may also have sometimes not even any errors, to which it's going to be a little bit harder to identify where it is because with an error, it'll just tell you where something isn't working, or without the error, you'll have to look deeper and identify where it isn't being reached. So this is just one of the examples I had to go through. There were a bunch of other examples. Like when I was trying to set up my own data dictionary, it was so hard to try to get it so that it was returning the value and I was able to call that specific value because it was so new to me. But after learning it a little more and doing a lot more code skills with it, then I was able to not have any more flaws come with it. Okay. All right. And then the last part of our agenda is what tools programmers use. With programming, you don't have to use different tools. You don't have to use different modules or different systems that others have used. It is completely up to you. However, using them may make it a lot easier on you, but you can create everything on your own. Just might not be as the best as someone else has made it for you. So, for instance, a lot of people like to use Rojo. Rojo is essentially like it's a little system where you can edit the code on Visual Studio Code, and it will take those changes that you've done and put it into Roblox Studio. A lot of people use Visual Studio Code just because of the many pros that come with it, with like the different features and all that good jazz, as well as people like to use GitHub and Git just so that they can send whatever code they did into a repository so that they can use it for version control, or like if they need to look back at something, or if they're going to merge some code into the main game, they're going to use GitHub so that they can verify everything rather than having to publish everything at once. Up to you. I don't use Rojo a lot just because I found it to be a little slower for me because I'm a lot more used to Roblox Studio, but it's up to you. There are different modules and different systems that people like to use. I started using Profile Service. Uh, Profile Service is like a data management system, and it's a lot better than what I had. Essentially, what I had was just the data and then save it. However, there were issues where data wasn't being saved at times, so that was a bit frustrating to deal with. So what I had to do essentially was I needed to find something new. I used to use Data Store 2 a lot when I first started, but I found that to be a little bit annoying to mess with. So I started to use Profile Service, and I found that to be the best so far. Some people like to use Roblox TypeScript. I don't use TypeScript a lot or ever, but that's just a different programming language, and it's translating it into Lua, or like they're taking the same structure of what TypeScript is and it's translating it with the Lua tools. So essentially, programmers will use different like plugins, different modules, but it's all up to you. You don't have to use it, but it can make a lot of the systems that you're making a lot simpler because someone has already created something for you to make it a lot easier. So, yeah. I mean, that's essentially all I had with this presentation. But, like, as I said a lot, it takes a lot of practice. But once you get the hang of it, you got this. Trust me. We have lots of beginners starting, and I've seen a lot of people like they're on the edge where they're going to just stop completely because something isn't working. But like there's so many tools that you can use to learn programming. Like there's YouTube channels. Like I recommend using Alvin Blocks. That's what helped me a lot when I first started. There's also the Roblox University, maybe dated a little bit, a lot actually, but I used that when I was starting. And then you have the developer forum, which you can use to get help. I'm there a lot usually, trying to help people when I can. Know a lot for more free right now, up until like not next week, but the following week. So I'll be hanging around there trying to help people. So there are people who are going to help you out. They're not going to just let you sit there and you can't figure it out. But it takes a lot of practice, and you're going to hit a few roadblocks here and there, but once you get the hang of it, those roadblocks will start to diminish, and you may have other roadblocks, but it'll get better. Trust me. So, thank you guys so much for attending my event, and now we shall go into the Q&A. Let me just check the chat. Is there some like coroutine close or something? I bet there was something Deep Aquatic Blue with closing the quarantine. A coroutine. I don't know why I said quarantine. Coroutine. I haven't really used coroutines a lot. I don't usually use them, but there is probably something to stop the coroutine. Let me take a look at the QA. All right. So a question from MetaPoly is about debugging. How do you identify and resolve memory leaks? Oh, that's a good question. So I had a memory leak in my own game, and my goodness, it made me go crazy because what would happen was it was like a murder mystery game, and everyone would equip a knife. And with that knife, there were a bunch of touched connections that were being created, and imagine if there were 20 people with those touch connections. And what would happen is, as you create these connections, essentially, so what would happen was people would unequip the knife, and re-equip the knife, and it wouldn't disconnect those connections. It would just essentially create new connections on top of those existing connections. And because of that, it's going to be creating a ton of different connections to which it's going to kill the client. So that's what happened with me. What I had to do essentially was I had to create a system so that it's going to identify if you already had a touch connection and let it be, or if there was one, disconnect it, then create a new connection if there's any changes that needs to be done. But when you're done using a connection, usually that's what memory leaks occur from, using connections that are no longer needed, but you're not disconnecting them. When you're done with the connection, always disconnect it. Don't leave it, because you're going to build up so many connections and it's going to essentially cause a memory leak. That's a good question. I already answered that. Do you want me blue? Have there been moments where it wasn't possible to implement certain features due to Roblox limitation? Yes, there have been a few situations for me where I couldn't use it because of Roblox limitations. I had a like what I had to do for one of the death effects I wanted to create was I wanted it so that they would fall into this warp hole and they would be put back at the top and rinse and repeat. But the problem was, because of the collision groups, it would not do that and it would get stuck. And I couldn't really figure out why. I just found out it was like a limitation that was happening within Roblox, and I couldn't really control that. So I had to kind of scrap the idea. There were a few other limitations that were brought up, but like we always will find like a workaround. It may not be the best workaround, but it is a workaround until Roblox does officially add something in. I know for our accelerator game, we really want to add in like animated faces and make it so that the NPCs you'll be talking to are a bit more lively instead of just sitting there and stare at you like my Roblox avatar that you see. So we wanted to add that in. So we have to create our own little system just for that. So there are limitations, but Roblox, of course, is working to make it so that they could make it so that we can do that a lot simpler. Okay. Do you use maids? I do not use maids, but I've heard about maids. Yeah. I'm gonna try to use garbage collection a little more because I found that to be a little bit more better. So I need to kind of get into that a little more. But I don't use maids at the moment. I haven't really had a use for them, but I probably will start using them soon. So how do you start the code? So essentially what I want to do with my code is I want to identify what I want to do. So for instance, if I want it so that this player can kick a ball when they're in range, I'm going to have to identify the different connections. In that case, I can use like a run service connection to identify if they're close by. And if they are close by, and then we'll know, okay, then they're able to kick this ball if they press a button or they press a letter on the keyboard. Okay. I can't answer that. Anything specific you should try that's helpful for practicing code? Yes. So I do have a suggestion. So what I did when I first started programming was I went to a YouTube channel, also known as Alvin Blocks, where I started to program. So I just watched his tutorials, followed along what he did. Um, then like if you remember, he made this like little piggy tutorial series. I watched that and like, okay, I was like, this is cool. So I went a little bit ahead of him. I kind of started like he was going to get into remote events really later into the series, but I kind of got into it really early. So I kind of explored further and tried to figure out ways to make it so that I can do certain things. So I got into remote events. And when he got into it, I was like, oh, this is a breeze. I already know this. So essentially that's what I did. My suggestion though is once you get out of the habit of using YouTube videos, you can use the developer hub, or I guess what Roblox is creating. There's this like new one that's coming along, but you can use the developer hub for looking at APIs. I recommend looking at the different APIs and trying new things out because you never know. You may use that specific instance or that specific function to make something you want. to work out in a lot better manner. So I recommend looking at that. What I usually do if I can't find the specific thing on the developer hub is I look on the developer forum if someone has asked it before and see what they did and try to see if I can do the same thing with my own. And if you're still stuck, there's always people out there to help you out. They're not going to just leave you there. Okay. Is task.spawn better than coroutines? I don't know if I can really answer that question. I want to say yes, just because I know the task library is a lot better to use, just because they're doing the same thing that you would do on a run service, but like the weight, it's using like heartbeat to determine time. So I believe yes. I'm not 100% sure. Do you handle visuals on the client or server? So I use the client. I found that if you do it on the client, it's going to run a lot smoother on them because what you're doing is you're having these specific tweens or these specific particles or UI stuff running on the client. It's a lot smoother than having to do it on the server. For instance, for me, you should not be doing this, but I did knife throwing on the server. And if you know anything about the client server model, that is not good because essentially it's going to make it choppy and it's going to be creating like it's just going to be making it a lot slower for clients. So it's better to do it on the client. I do that a lot more. And it's like my thought process is anything that's visual, do it on the client. Anything that's not visual, do it on the server. I did a lot of visual. I did some of the visual stuff on the server, and I've been trying to switch over to the client. Like, I took care of ragdolls on the server, which is not a good idea. So I switched over to the client, and it made it a lot smoother. And then, does Roblox use threads? I'm not sure. I have not really gone into the thread stuff yet. Still learning here and there, but I haven't really gotten to that. So, yeah. Okay, like check. No problem. Oh, okay. Render fidelity. I believe the rendered fidelity. Let me look really quickly. I will looking to see render fidelity. I believe it was an enum. Yeah, you would have to use an enum for the render fidelity. Okay. All right. Any other questions? We're done like 17 minutes early. Oh, I did have um I did have one thing I wanted to tell you all. Could you please, at the end of the event, you'll be receiving an email about feedback. Please, please, please fill it out. It will help me create better events and I'll know what you guys are more into so that I can create events that are more specific to what you guys would want. So please do fill it out. It helps me grow as an event organizer and it'll help me better plan out my events. I've been not receiving as many feedback as I would like and it's been making it a little bit harder for me to create events that are more specific towards what you guys would want. So please do fill it out. Here we go. What's the largest number you can store in an integer value? I believe. Let me go check. The largest you can store is 9.2 quintillion. I don't think you'll ever. Yeah, I don't think you'll ever get there. um. Does the particle part of the image wait, does the particle part of image or some code? So the particles, you don't have to really code it. They're essentially just creating these different, like they have this instance for particles, and they're just editing the different transparencies, the different sizes based on a number sequence. But they're adding this particle just for the looks, not really anything coding related. I did use some code with particles, like if I want it so that the player's in a certain zone, then I'll make it so it starts snowing. So there isn't really much you would do with coding in that sense. I hope that answered your question. How do you get rid of plugins, and how do you also get rid of games? I have a game I made just to test out building and stuff, and the plugin glitched out and ruined the experience for me. So I want to get rid of. So what you can do, Elementron, is you can go back a different version. So like you can identify what version is causing that issue. So you can go back that specific version. Unfortunately, Roblox does not allow you to get rid of games. You can only archive them, but they'll still be associated with your profile, but you just can't remove it. But you can always just go back a version and look. That's what I've done before. Okay. All logic things should be happening on the server, right? Yes. Please make sure you're doing all logical items on the server, because the client can always edit that value, and the client will just see whatever the edited value is, while the server is going to the server is essentially just going to check based on what the server data is, because essentially what happens is if the client tries to edit something, it's not going to replicate to the server. So they're not going to see any of the changes. So like if you, for instance, had an integer value and you put 101, the server is still going to see 0. And it helps with exploits. Is it better to have all code in one script? Not so much. So what I recommend is if you have different functions for different things, try putting them in different module scripts so that it's a lot more organized. I used to have a script that had everything, and it kind of got over 20,000 lines, and it was kind of overwhelming, and it kind of killed my computer. So I don't recommend doing that. So having different scripts, like different module scripts for different things, it's going to help you out. It's going to make it a lot cleaner, of course. Following up to my question, what does archiving a game do? Essentially, it just removes it from your profile. It doesn't do much else. It doesn't delete it. It just archives it. And if you ever want to look back, you just, call it back. Does strict type make Lua faster? I have not got into types yet with Luau, so I don't really know the answer to that yet. I plan to get into it, but I'm not there just yet. Would you say Roblox Lua is easy to learn? Yes, it is easy to learn. I can promise you that. I've learned different programming languages, and I struggled the most with them. So once you understand Lua, then you'll be able to understand the other languages a lot. A really good example I would have to say is C++. I struggled with that language like crazy because it was just so complicated. There's so many different things you'd have to take care of, and so it was a bit harder. So when I learned Lua, it was a bit easier because I was going through so many different tutorials and trying to understand it, and they were using stuff I learned from another tutorial, so it was nice to build off of. So for the most part, I would say it is easy. It may be hard at first. Yeah. What is the proper formatting for variables? Up to you. I prefer Pascal case because I can read it a lot better. Programmers, they like to use camel case, Pascal case, or snake case. It's up to you, really. But my recommendation is whatever one you choose, you should try to stick with it the whole entire time. And then, do you get a reward for attending? No, there aren't any rewards to it. Sorry. I installed a plugin that helps detect malicious scripts and other plugins and items made by others. Would you recommend plugins like that? It's up to you. I don't really use other models. What I do is I look to just see if I want just a part, I will go to the model, I'll get the part, and then I'll just remove everything else. For me, it's a lot quicker to identify if something is suspicious or not. But for some other people, it's really interesting and important to look into the code and make sure there isn't anything that's going to ruin your game. Isn't it important that everyone has the same type of formatting and style of the code? So It does matter, but it's important that your code is readable to other people, and if they read it, they'll understand it right away. I prefer Pascal case. People use Camel case. People use Snake case. But if they all do the same, if you can still read it, that's the most important part. If I can't understand it, then I can't really help you. Be sure though, on top of that is make sure you add comments. Comments are very important so that people can identify what this program is supposed to do. So if you add in those comments, it's going to help a ton. I've had to add in comments a lot, and it made it a lot easier, especially for me if I forget. How many years have you been scripting? I started in 2014 when I was in 6th grade, but I really didn't get too far deep until like when I was in like 9th grade. So I've been doing it for like 7, 8 years. I've done robotics as well, so I did have outside understandings from different programming languages like a C and C++, but I've done programming for a long time. I've also started way before that with Scratch. If any of you don't know what Scratch is, it's just a little place where you can make games with drag and drop. How would you rate yourself as a scripter where you are now? And I don't know how I'd rate myself. It's really subjective. But I would say I am pretty far ahead of a lot of people. I still have stuff I have to learn. Like I haven't really got too deep with luau. I kind of just like, oh, cool, luau exists, and then I kind of moved on from it. So I kind of need to get really into that. I like recently started learning meta tables and object-oriented programming, which I 100% recommend you do once you get the hang of programming. Don't do it now if you don't know it or don't know how to program. Do it when you have a better understanding. I kind of like treated it as like a disease when I heard about object-oriented programming, just because like it was so confusing to me. It was so hard to understand. However, after going through like one little video, I was able to grasp it really quickly. So I don't know what I would rate myself. If you really wanted a definitive answer, I would say advanced at this point. I've started coding using things like code.org and using Blockly and JavaScript, and have been gradually working on those for 2-3 now. Is that a good? You can start anywhere with programming. If you have background knowledge with programming, it will help you a ton when you start learning Roblox programming, because like for me, what happened was I didn't really know any other languages, so it took me a bit to learn Roblox Lua. However, once I learned Roblox Lua and started learning other languages, I learned them so quickly. Like Python, learned it in a day. C++, learned it in a week. Other languages, learned it really quickly. So it will be a little bit quicker for you when you start learning Lua, because you already know the syntaxes. You know all that stuff. It's a little bit different with Lua, but you'll have the same idea. Roblox Lua is just Lua modified to fit Roblox. Yep, it is. Essentially, it's that. Okay. How does Roblox manage table saving? I don't know the definitive answer to that. I don't know what they do in the background. Essentially, they're just saving to their data systems at Roblox. What's the difference between a container and a provider? Not so sure just yet. Okay. All right. Slightly off topic. How often do you host events like these? I try to host them as often as I can. I will try to host an event like this every 3 months. These next few months, though, it's going to be really hard for me to host anything because, as I brought up, I'm in the summer accelerator, so I will not have any time to do anything else other than just creating our game. So it's going to be really hard to do that kind of stuff. So I will try to host something. I'm trying to work out on another event. But yeah. What is the Summer Accelerator? Oh, great question. So Summer Accelerator is an internship at Roblox. And what you have to do essentially is you have to pitch this game idea to Roblox accelerator managers, and if they like your idea, then you're going to get paid to essentially create this game, and you'll be creating it as if you're working at a job. You'll be working for 8 hours a day, 40 hours per week. So I will be doing that essentially. We'll be creating a game for players to enjoy. Let me check out what it is. You don't have access here. Please verify that you are logged in. Try again. The rest of the page does show me. That's a bug. If that's what's okay, so that's what's feedback. All right, I'll have to let
That's one of the
know
bugs we've
about that.
noticed.
Oh, sorry, James.
Yeah, that's happening across Bevy, so that's
okay.
thing that's being sorted in the pipeline. Can you flag that up to Hal at the end? That'd be helpful.
Yeah, I can let them know. I'll let them all know. All right.
Cheers, Wally.
Cool. Are you the programmer for your accelerator? Yeah, I'm the programmer. There's another programmer too. I'm taking care of anything that has to do with what is it? Anything with customization. So like we have two parts of our game. We have the combat and then we have the customization. I'm taking care of the customization because I don't like anything with physics. Physics is gross. Are small coding workshops also hosted here? Yes, I have hosted one about how to create your own trick-or-treating game. So there are plans to create do little programming workshops. I do have another one. It's been sitting there for about a year now. It's about how to create your own little egg hunt game. I think a lot of you would really enjoy that. So I'll try to get that out there sometime soon. Can you host a coding competition? Actually, it's kind of planned for sometime soon. Do you also have a ton half-finished games just sitting on your computer? Yeah, I do. I have a lot of them. But I try to finish them. But if I don't enjoy it, I kind of just pause and I'm like, all right, moving on. Woolly University, when? I don't know. That's a good question. Would you participate in said competition? I would not. I would not participate. I would just host it. I don't want to put it in a disadvantage, but I would probably create something to show. You guys got this. Does the term developer apply to anyone who helps create a game, or just the person and people who script it when running? In my eyes, if you created something, you are a developer, whether it's big or small. If you created something, you are doing it right. All right, I think we are good to go. Any last questions for Q&A before I wrap up? I hope I made this event as informative as possible and I got you guys into the mindset of programming and what my mind goes through as I'm creating something. What Woolly's crazy mind goes through? Yes, my mind is very crazy in the inside. Is this recorded? Yes, I will be posting this actually after I finish up this event, and I will be posting it on the developer forum under the reply I made, so you shall see it there. Okay. I think that wraps up Q&A, so I will wrap that up. Okay. Thank you guys so much for attending my event. As I said, it will be kind of hard. Do you need experience for Lua? No, you don't. You can start fresh. I did not have any experience in Lua, and I just started. So this recording will also be on the event page that you will see. I have to upload it to YouTube first. You'll see it there. You'll also see it on the developer forum. I created a little post that said like, "Oh, this event is happening," so I'll make a reply with the recording link. Martian, you're fine. As I said earlier, when you guys have the chance and when Bevy fixes their system, please do fill out the feedback form. It will help a ton. If you guys do have issues with the feedback form, please message me on the developer forum and I will forward it to Roblox staff so that we can identify the issue and have it sent. So please, please, please send it. And as I said earlier, I won't be able to really host anything these next few months because I'll be accelerating at Roblox. So it'll be a little bit hard, but I do have an event towards August planned about the accelerator program. So a lot of you can understand it a little more and hopefully apply, and I will be able to see you. Even if it was already posted here. Okay. Yep. All right. Thank you guys so much for attending this event, as I said. And if you do have issues with the event feedback form, please DM me on I am a car. I am the car. But please do let me know and I will forward it to Roblox staff. Okay.